Hi guys, I'm Trakox. In today's video, I'm gonna show you entirely how I made this animation in Geometry Dash and with which I won a school contest. But before we start out, I suggest you to look at the video for the full story and the showcase. Now, with that being said, let's start off with the first scene. I made this base with a skin color, which is a kind of low saturated orange. Then I did the white of the eye completely white, with no variations of gray. For the eyelashes, I spammed black lines and warped quarter circle edges. And here comes the interesting part, the iris. These edges are slightly soft, so I used individual glow objects and spammed and rotated them to make a circle. Then I put a dark brown base. Beginners often wonder how people create such realistic eyes like the ones in Eyes in the Water, but it is much simpler than it looks. The iris details are made up of these simple objects, featuring occasional variations in brightness and hue. Of course, the pupil is just a simple black circle. What I made next to make the skin look like more realistic was spamming those objects in a random way and with a mini-man opacity. Other important details for the eye were the red capillaries and the white highlights. The eyebrows are warped quarter circle arcs, thinned down until they look like a slightly curved line. I applied the same approach to the hair, angling the strands slightly up and down to create the effect of being blown by the wind. The most important things to make this face look like three-dimensional are the shadows. I simply added some low-opacity black glow objects in the deeper parts. This is what it looks like without them. Now into the second part. I started with a gradient to make the sky at the sunrise time, dark azure on top and orange with blending in the underside. Then I made the base of those mountains, and now we go into the hands and forearms. The only difficulty making the base is the perspective in addition to the shapes. This time to make the three-dimensional effect I didn't use just shadows but also these spiral objects for the highlights. Now don't ask me much about the scooter because I have no idea of how it's made, so I randomly created a central shape, the brakes, some screws, the mirrors, and the handlebars and added the holes for the key and the gas. The clouds are simpler than you might think, they're just warped objects, but some are gray for the redacted part and others are orange with the blending option for the illuminated part. Here you can see I made the odometer and the analogic clock, which indicates an hour between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., which is a reference to the time when Alfredo died in the accident. The street is purely about perspective, in fact it starts being 32 blocks wide, ending to 1 block wide. The white lines are only made up by one warped slope, and the central ones are particles, the same as for these grass objects, starting very small and getting bigger. Of course I had to align their direction with the street edges. Now let's move into the third part. I made the sky gradient here too. For the stop signal I made this ion bar using highlights on the side edges because the light point of the sun is in the opposite direction. These objects have a brown coloring for a rust effect. The shape of this signal is so simple, the only thing that you gotta know is the good 3D, making it only in the correct sides and coloring those objects based on the light point. Another detail is this flock of birds, and every bird is literally made by this single object. Scene number 4. This guy right here is made by the same type of object. The skull of the death was hard to make because of its shape. Then inside one eye hole I made this red dot to make it look like crepey. Other details I used to make this scene more scary are the black glow on one side of the head, the red glow behind the figure and the black rocks with dark red highlights. I used these glow objects and spammed them, attempting to make the dress of the death look like more realistic. As I did for the first and second scenes I spammed these objects to increase the detail level, and used some shadows. These liquid animated objects and the white particles, in addition to the camera triggers, were to make this part less static and cinematic. For these scenes I made these two cars, not much complex but enough to look like realistic in a small fraction of a second. For the vibes in this Blu-ray I just used custom particles. This crack is composed of white lines and glow elements, along with other small details. To create the whole effect, I overlaid a smaller black layer of the same shape. The broken heart is made up of lines featuring blending and edges of glow, creating a sort of neon effect. When I made this part, not gonna lie, I spammed randomly these black figures and made them go white with simple color and alpha triggers. They represent all the souls of people that died in accidents on the street. I didn't know yet how to make realistic clouds, so I just warped these giant objects. This part is the simplest one. I spammed those details on the ground, made these streets on different layers, and those black objects moving are just warped particles, nothing special. I wanted to represent a small planet, but it ended up being just a little decent. The ninth part is simple except for the hand, the clock, and the hourglass, on which I tried hard making the sand look like as realistic as I could. For this hand you can see the details are pretty much the same as before. I bet this is the part you'd be most interested in seeing how it's made. I started with a simple two-dimensional base, made by simple circles, triangles and lines, but how did I make the signage three-dimensional? Let's take a random one for example. Yeah, this is what I did. But don't forget about shadows and highlights, those make a big part of the 3D effect, and doing this with all the signs it becomes mind-blowing. The end screen is simple too. I copied this stop sign from the third part, the street and the sky gradients from the second one, the figure from the sixth one, and replaced the legs with a fire object to make it look like a phantom. Then I spammed these grass objects, put some low opacity stars, and about my icon I'll talk about it in another video. By the way, the font is this one. Thank you so much guys for watching this video, subscribe and stay tuned for more content.